Hi there. Give me a thumbs up if you're supposed to be muted. Alrighty. Thank
All right, we're unmuted. When do you want to start, Steve?
Okay. Okay, the time is 6:38, January 21st. Welcome to our first meeting of the Community Development Committee. Call the meeting to order. Again, 6:38, and we have one agenda item evening ahead of us. So without further ado, I will present President Shaw to discuss the role of our committee moving forward.
Yeah, so we're just talking a little bit about the history and see if you want to jump in with any of
I
this.
certainly will.
Yeah, just kick it into the table. Because I think, Rennie, you've served on this committee, but definitely know the history of it. This is a council committee, the community development. However, in the 6 years that I have served, it has kind of blended into the advisory, community development advisory committee that is tasked by the executive branch. And we have kind of become one. The main goal, actually, at least for my 6 years, the only goal really was to allocate the CDBG monies. So that was one time a year for what, 4 months?
Yeah,
And it was
very
they were
intense.
very
for a short
intense
time.
4 months. And for a long time, I think the first 4 years of my service, so first 6 years of Steve's and Rennie's, we would have the final say, the common council would have the final say. However, was it 2 years ago? The mayor changed that, and now he has the final say, and we are just an advisory role. Instead of it going from us to him, back to us, it now goes from him to us, back to him. the charter, that's what the charter says, so there's nothing that we could do to change that unless we want to change the charter. But all we have is, this is what this committee is recommending to do. So we're still going to do that each year, give our advisory, and we could do that in tandem with the advisory committee. We could do it however we want to operate that I would leave that up to Steve, how you want to work that through and work with the community development, Office of Community Development. But that's where that's changed in the last couple of years. Do you want to add anything to the history?
Pretty much that's pretty concise, pretty accurate. Yeah, very intense, but a couple of years ago, as Andrea said, things changed a little bit. There has been a little, what should we say? I don't know, people are not
We were
quite,
disappointed.
yeah, disappointed, right? That, we used to spend a lot of time, I just told the committee this a few minutes ago, we would spend hours, deliberating on, the allocations. Not that it was always fun, but, it was always a nice collaborative effort. It was, and at the end of the day, we usually walked out of here, shaking hands and patting each other on the back for spending 6 hours together, meeting a common goal. And then it's not the case anymore. So we are strictly advisory. People feel a little frustrated by that, and quite frankly, some people do not relish the thought of sitting here for 4 or 5 hours to give advice, shall we say.
I see.
So, but I still think, my feeling is, I think it's a good idea for us to weigh in on this, give our advice. In the event HUD has any problems, with the selections that were made, we're gonna cover our bases. And I'm not sure whether the mayor thinks it's helpful or not. Opinion, I guess, but I think we should go on record, between the advisory committee and this committee, come to a decision on what we feel should be allocated and give that to the mayor, whether he wants to use it in his decision making, that's up to him, but I would feel more comfortable with it.
And question,
So, sure.
this historically, was there also a community advisory, the same committee?
Yes.
Advisory committee that it now existed then?
Yeah, and as Andrea, I'm not sure where it all kind of joined together. That was probably before my time.
Yeah.
But now it's just kind of, we all meet, and sometimes I kind of forget who's on what committee, but everybody usually works so well.
Because it's the same goal.
We don't
which is
really
how we work the funds.
make any distinction. We're all at the table. We're all equals.
Mhm.
So sometimes you lose sight of who's on what committee, but you're out for the same goals.
Right.
But I also would like to have clear distinction between a council committee and an advisory committee, because we have stricter processes, we have very specific processes. And I want to and we weren't necessarily following those, and it's not only confusing for council members, but it's also confusing to the public, and we really can't have that. So this will be making it more transparent and more clear, giving us more clarity, will definitely help the public understand what we're doing. I think that's essential.
So I have a question. So I know that the fair housing report is being done with a consultant this year. So will that come to this committee to be approved before it goes to the council?
Yes, although they're actually, consultants are coming, and they're coming from, I think, Pittsburgh, and they'll be here the week of our caucus.
Okay,
So we'll actually have them for caucus.
Okay.
Because of the timing, and also that way the full council could hear too. But
okay,
yeah,
great.
that would be some of the goals. And then the other idea is community development. I've thought, since I've been on the council, should be more than just CDBG. I do a lot with this committee. And so, as you all know, I'm adding the housing element, and the Laws and Rules Committee endorsed that change in the council rules. So I'll explain a little bit about my thoughts for this, but this is just my thoughts. I do not believe in leadership from the top down, so we could turn it into whatever that this committee wants, but this is where I'm coming from. So as you know, housing is crucial. We did try a special housing committee, but it was during the subcommittee, it was right at the beginning of COVID. It didn't, what did we, last for like a year? And that just didn't work. This one is gonna be a public meeting. We have to follow our open meeting law. We have to follow all council processes. So I think I think it gives it a little bit more strength. So my idea, or at least for the housing element, is first of all, to have it as a central hub for older people to know what is happening. I'm just gonna use Michelle as an instance, because I know she's been going through housing issues in one of her apartment complexes in Ward 9. Some of the stuff that she's dealing with for West Chestnut, or
Chestnut
the
Mansion.
Chestnut Mansions, may or may not be occurring in your wards, and anything that, you know, now or in the future, and anything that she learns could be shared, and so that you could take to your constituents, so that you're not all working in 9 different pockets, so that you kind of learn from each other. And so this, Michelle could give, you know, some valuable information on what worked for her constituents, and then you could take from there. Or on the other hand, she's like, I don't know what to do. And Gina's like, oh, this worked in Ward 4, you know, so kind of a central hub for us to communicate instead of just doing our own constituent service. To have regular updates from the housing director. So I did talk to the mayor about the whole approach on this. And he also did agree that he liked the idea of having Bartek, our housing director, come and give regular updates on what his office is doing, and just an opportunity for you all to ask any questions specific to his department that could benefit your ward and constituents. So he's not here today, but he is planning on coming in February. And so I'll work, Steve and I, we could figure out how we'll work it to see when, if you can't make it 1 month, then we'll know and see if we want to meet or not. So that was one other idea. The third idea, again, big picture, is just more opportunity for public education and engagement can happen in council meetings, because we are live, people listen to us, the press reports, so the stuff that we talk about could get out there to the people more than if we're only doing our own constituent service, or even anything that the city administration could do. We just meet the press a little bit, or the press comes to us a little bit more than any other organization, I think, operating in the city. So those were kind of the big goals that I was thinking, but I think I was talking with Michael and Michelle after a meeting last week, and something kind of collectively we thought of is, you now know where I'm coming from for establishing this. I think it'd be really good for you all to think about what you want to get out of this. We could talk about whether it goes to Steve or me or whoever else wants to be tasked with this role, is to gather those thoughts and perhaps come up with a mission statement of what this committee can do, so it's not all just piecemeal. And then also, because we do have a lot of different housing pockets, housing committees throughout the county, throughout the city, and so basically what are we doing? And it does not have to be the 3 goals. If you want to say, no, Andrea, public education and it's a bad idea, and you don't want that, which I don't think any people say that, but.
That's a passive aggressive way to.
What, me? No. I was trying to pick one that I thought sounded
Okay.
completely ridiculous. So I don't know, that was a lot of me talking, so if anybody has any questions or thoughts, Michael and Michelle?
So one, I think this is great. I think this is very important. I think one thing that we should be also considering is examining specific policies that we should, a 3-year review of the ETPA, our tenant opportunity to purchase, unreasonable rent increases. These are all policies that we should be examining to see if they are a good fit for our city. I think also probably we should be issuing an annual report. I think that is a good way of a long-term solution that can be looked back on 5 or 6 years from now, so we can examine, Alderman in the future can examine the steps that we laid out a little easier than just like minutes or public record.
Yep.
It's kind of a lot of work, but
You're volunteering for
we've
it.
all,
Yeah.
we've all been on so many housing boards that say this is important, and then we're no further along to solving the housing crisis.
Right.
So I think like critically examining policies to increase housing stock and also keep people in their homes is really critical.
On two fronts, I think this is really a good idea, as Michael said, this is gonna be a vehicle. I mean, otherwise, we go months without seeing Bartek.
Right,
And, you know, it comes if there's an issue involved that he has to talk to us. I think it's gonna be good for him, to once a month, come sit and talk to us. And this, you know, he can use us as a vehicle, you know, to move things along and us at the same time, we can move things out of this committee,
right.
which were never happening before. So I think it's good. And, you know, from the advisory board and the committee itself here, we need something else to do. I mean, most of the time, other than those couple months a year, we usually cancel the meetings because there's nothing on the agenda. You know, once we allocate the funds, we're kind of done. And everybody gets a little frustrated with that. You know, they sign up to give their time to a committee that doesn't meet most of the time. So it's a little frustrating for them. I think everybody will relish having something a little meatier to discuss every month. So I think it's a good start. Jean?
Oh, Michelle had her hand up.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm really glad that you did this. I appreciate it because I think it needs to be consolidated, as everyone said. I just had a couple of things that I put on a list. So Housing Justice for All is a consortium of groups, housing groups within the state that work on campaigns at the Albany level. They're the ones that pushed for ECPA expansion in 2019, and then the Good Cause the first time around, and then Good Cause for us to pass it. So they're bringing Good Cause back to Albany again this year, plus another bunch of other campaigns that they'll be calling on municipalities to support. So if like that is something that we can do through this committee, that would be great. And then there is going to be, I sent in a communication today, there's going to be a tenant hotline for the Hudson Valley and Kingston. So I asked them to come speak at our next meeting if that works. And then ECPA, we all received these booklets when we passed it from HCR. So I don't know if anybody, council members that have left have passed their book on. So maybe, okay, so maybe Bartek can get these. I'll ask him to get these for everybody, but yeah, I'll ask Bartek. So as it's been in the news, we're having a ton of issues at Chestnut Mansion. And so I've had some conversations with the mayor and with Corporation Council and looking into what we can do to even, if there's any way to beef up any regulations within our building department code and things like that. So that I think could be something that come through here. And I'd also love to see some Kingston specific tenant literature. I know that there's all this stuff that's like state and, you know, from the Attorney General, but something that really just is about Kingston and what Kingston can control and who is specifically to call. And as far as policy, the right to counsel program, this is only gonna last until ARPA funds are over. And I think it would be great to track the data coming out of there and eviction data and possibly see if it's something that we can legislate if there's an ongoing funding source, since we're looking at the funding sources that the city has. So, and last, I saw that Albany has a community development housing committee as well, and they have nights where they have tenants come in and speak. So I think it would be great if maybe we do it by ward or by different buildings or things like that ongoing, just so we know what's going on.
Yeah, I think those are all great
And I can
ideas.
send this up in, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
so do you want to just everybody come up with some ideas and then I'll put them together and then we could bring it back next month? Does that sound like a plan?
Jean, did you want to say something?
Go ahead. No, that's all.
I mean, I like the idea that you just came up with tracking for the next 5 years. That's great, because then the next group of people will know what's going on.
Yeah, we have, community, you're not late, you're early.
It's another meeting.
Yeah, we have back to back, yeah.
I really appreciate this, and I really appreciate you utilizing the city building department. Can, as an ex-employee, they go into the apartments. They know what's going on in every apartment in the city. And with the people, like a lot of people, they do come and complain, but they're the cause of the complaint. We do have a lot of very good landlords, but we have some real crappy ones too. So I really like the idea that if you could include them in on that, you know, to get something from building department on some of the apartments that they go in, on what is their general house, because the house cleaning, like, you can't tell people how to live. You're not gonna tell them to pick up their dirty socks, but if there's, you know, kitchen shelves broke and this, that, you know it's that person, the people that are living in there destroying property. So there's really a fine line with that. I really love the ideas that I'm hearing, because housing has been a big thing in my ward, and working for building department, we've heard it all. So, you know, these are really great transparency ideas for our community. And I think it's for every one of our wards, because we've had a couple of really bad tenants, you know, in really good neighborhoods also. It's not just Ward 4, it's not just Pekaki, it's not just, you know, Ward 7 or Ward 9. We've had some really, and I'll tell you, some of them, it's really just the tenants refusing to pay. I'm gonna say more often, for me personally, if you ever got the data on my computer and some of the pictures on my computer, you would cringe.
Well, these aren't tenant-related issues, these are systemic building-wide issues and lack of infrastructure and those kind of issues.
Well, then
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
yeah, that's what I'm
Appreciate
talking
the
to.
building,
Yeah.
building department really does need to come in with that, because you do have quite a bit,
Right.
they see it all. So I really love these ideas that you're going and attacking this full force in all areas of all of us.
And one, just to clarify process. So if you have a guest speaker that you would like to come, send in a communication and I'll put it on the agenda. All right, and if, you know, I have all 5 of you reaching out with somebody, I might say, hey, maybe we should wait until March and I'll kind of coordinate, or wait until the following month, so that we don't have all of these speakers in one night, because not only does that make a long night for us, but it makes a long night for the speakers too. I don't foresee that happening, but I just wanted to make sure that I'll be clear and transparent on that reason with all of you. But that's how the process, we want to bring a guest speaker. So Michelle sends in a communication for a guest speaker. I'll put that on, but it'll go through the same channels, the communication channels. And speaking of speakers, Bartek, so most of you know that when we passed the form-based zoning code in August, part of the council's, part of what we added into there was regular check-ins, that we wanted to know what was happening. So the first one was in 6 months. It's already been 6 months, or close to. So he's gonna do the zoning update at community development next week. So I think that'll be really important for your constituents.
Next
to
week or
know.
next month?
Next month, sorry. Next month.
Yes.
So, and I'll let the rest of the council members know that as well, because they may want to come for that. But in case you have constituents who want to hear, because I don't know if there have been many updates to the public. So it looks like, well, Bartek giving that and then 1 guest speaker. So that would be the process for that.
Yeah, I mean, everything I've heard sounds great. I think it's great to have this kind of a forum, and, you know, I sit on one housing task force, and I know that there are things going on that it would be good to make more public, even though that meeting is public too, but just for everybody to know what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think it's terrific, and Bartek can report on all of that.
And I think also this can also help serve as a vehicle for ETPA tenants who have these maintenance issues that are supposed to be treated a little differently than non-ETPA tenants.
Yeah.
Quite explicitly not being.
Right,
Yeah, so the same thing for tenants. So if you want to have tenants from one of your apartment buildings, why don't you send it in as a communication too?
right.
So that everything is really clear. Okay, so that nobody has any doubt what we're gonna talk about, and you know how to go through that process.
Now, would we have that, like, at one meeting, just have like, say, Sarah and Michael bring in their people, then another meeting, somebody else, or wouldn't just,
Well, we could talk about that if we wanna have one meeting where we have it, where if any tenant from any city wants to come in, or any landlord from any part of the city, I mean, we could do that too. But if you specifically want Stony Run tenants to come speak,
right,
then Sarah would send in a communication for that. But if the committee wants to say, let's just do a tenant night, then we'll figure out how to publicize that and move forward with that idea.
Great.
Okay? And this is all a new concept, so if I do anything that seems odd, just, poke me and say, hey, that seems odd. Or any suggestions on anything.
So just a process question. So we're not voting on any of this tonight, but we'll vote on it at the council meeting. What was passed in those rules to make this housing?
Well, no, it's a little odd because I have control of the committees, so I really could do what I want,
All right.
but I don't like to just do that. So that's why I'm here.
So
Well,
you
that's
want
my
to seek
point.
our involvement.
Yes, so I could just come in and be like, hey, this is what it is.
The warrant.
The thing for the laws and rules is just changing the name on the
Okay.
in the council rules, but I mean, all of this, I could just say, this is what you guys have to do, that's not how I operate. But there's nothing to pass, but if there is anything that I said that you're like uncomfortable with or want to expound on, I am all ears. But that's all I have.
And I think it'd be nice to have a little time to digest all this,
Yeah.
even if we were gonna vote on something, so, I think time is not of the essence here.
Correct.
And I just have one last thing to add, as she walks in. I attended the arguments at the appellate on Friday for the ETPA and Rhode Island. Did a really great job.
I texted-
Defending our.
I texted her because I was walking, yeah. We won't talk about it, but I was very excited. I was walking the halls of Albany Law and I heard somebody walking the other way. Oh, I'm going to oral arguments. Kingston is gonna be there. I was like, "Ah."
Yeah, and that also does very great.
Yeah. So,
That's nice that they came to support. It was-
so thank you and
Thank you.
for doing what you did. I heard it was great. I haven't listened to it yet, but I will. You wanna take a call? Are we done? We
We
done?
are done, yeah, thank you.
You wanna take a 2-minute break while we switch?
Yeah.
Well, I need a motion to adjourn this.
Motion.
Okay, everybody in agreement? Anybody opposed? Thank you, we are adjourned.
I'm just gonna mute us for a couple minutes while we reorganize here.
Okay.
There we go, we're good.
Welcome back, everyone. It is January 23rd, 2004 at 7:05, and I'm calling the Laws and Rules Committee to order. I am Chairwoman Alderwoman Michelle Hirsch. In attendance, we have Alderman Bob Dennison, Alderwoman Sarah Hasty, Alderwoman Terrell Mickens, Alderman Rennie Scott Childress.
Yeah, I think so.
Nice.
Oh,
That's it. Okay.
I think we're
All right, so the first item on the agenda is the fee schedule edition, and we have Barbara Graves Poller from our Corporation Council here to discuss this agenda item. If you'd like to come up and join us.
Sure. So the agenda as posted says that we're talking about the 277 fee amendment, but that's not entirely accurate. We talked about that with finance. The material behind it contains the actual communication. So that communication was about amendments to 277 itself, not the license fee. So I think all of you should have the proposed amendments to 277. I did print out some additional copies. Let me not speak too soon. I didn't, but we can get additional copies if anybody needs them. We don't, so I can ask.
Okay.
When it comes up, I'll ask him if he can just,
Forward to.
yeah, a copy of it or.
We also have a copy. All right.
Is that gonna be loud? I know, it's okay.
I mean, you can, I'll keep one of you, copy the other. which is great. Right. So just to, and Sue is here, because, you know, she and I have been working very closely with Bartek to talk about, thank you, to talk through these proposed changes. The goal overall is, well, there are a few purposes. One is to look at all of our transiently occupied buildings and make sure that we are being uniform in our oversight and actually strengthening our compliance across the board. There are a number of provisions in 277 that have been used, you know, over the years, but sometimes have sort of not been used as our use of those provisions has evolved over the years. Sometimes the planning board has given special, has a good special use permit process with certain transient occupied structures. But then for others, those property owners only went before the buildings department. And that's not necessarily wrong, but there should be a kind of uniform approach and a comprehensive registry of who is where operating in the city. And whether they've had to go through planning or buildings, you know, we have the clerk's office to have a document that checks off, okay, you got all of the required permissions, you're up to date with everything, they pay a fee that is designed to not be onerous. I think it, you know, 100 or 150. So that is tied to the cost of administering this type of, you know, oversight, but it's not going to hamper anybody's business. So that's kind of the general overview. And this seems like a perfect time to look at these provisions as the council is working to implement a new group. Anything else, Sue, that you think we should
The only
add?
thing I also would just add is that it's an appropriate time now with the new form-based code. This also aligns this language of this section of the city code with the form-based code. So.
Right, I'm glad you mentioned that because there is a place in 405. There are a couple of terms that are used in 405 that either weren't quite clear enough or that maybe we hadn't addressed previously. So this is intended to harmonize all of our definitions as well. You'll see there are a couple of outstanding issues, not ones that would necessarily stand in the way of moving forward with a local law change, but that will require additional work from various departments. One of them is the license waiver criteria. So if you look at the proposed 277-2B, petition for relief from license. It's not clear to to me, why that may have been used in the past. But one of the issues we've spoken about is the fact that if some property owner has already gone through pretty rigorous process of getting a short-term rental license, which is a much higher amount, than the 150 here, then we've written in here that there would be a kind of automatic exemption for that. You don't have to pay the $650 and then go back and pay for a second license on top of the $650. But if there are any other criteria for relief, that's something that could be worked out administratively down the road. I don't know, maybe in the discussion, sort of talk to the council has thoughts about that. The other, there's a transitional housing definition in 405. I don't know if you want to start talking about that a little bit, or if you start talking about it. Go ahead. So 277, as the title indicates, is focused on transiently occupied lodging only, which, you know, is under the 30 days. But there is a provision in 405, the form-based code, that talks about, or form-based code sections that talk about transitional housing, which are more than the 30-day period, but not sort of our standard residences. And there are some properties that, going through the special use permit process, have already sort of started operating in a transitional housing fashion.
Like a boarding house.
But-
Or most recently, I think, we've had Washington Avenue come online. They're small, single units, single person units, but really and truly is more of a transitional. They're overseen by Family Woodstock. And, the goal is obviously to get these people back into a, full-fledged, apartment at some point, be able to grow and expand, so it's transitional.
So services are usually attached to those, to transitional housing, as opposed to transient housing.
So transient isn't, there are transiently occupied residential buildings, but for 277 purposes, transient applies to Kinsey Hotel as much as it does any other bed and breakfast, as it does to any place or a boarding home that is not transitional housing, which, as we sort of are moving here, is more transitional, is housing plus supports. And so that's just something that has to be further sort of fleshed
I
out.
think historically, boarding homes, rooming homes were not long-term. We have boarding homes, that where people are there for well beyond the 30 days, the 29 days. And that's where they become more of a transitional type housing.
But I'm a little confused about the initial purpose though. So for instance, if you had like Samaria, and there are services that are wrapped up in that transitional type of housing. But yet you have, say, a woman that opens up her home, she gets a boarding house, license to operate a boarding house. And those people, their tenure there is limited to what?
So there are the form-based code, it says they do have a limitation of less than 30 days.
Less than 30.
Well, it's not just our form-based code. Transiently occupied properties are kind of a category.
Mhm.
And so it's not just that we only define that category. State law also provides definitions for that category. Michael?
You just answered the question.
So, but what we're trying to do is bridge that gap, right? Because we know on the ground, there are some places that don't fall neatly into purely transient or other, our standard residential. And so all of this part of the discussion is to say that we don't have to hold up the proposed amendment process while some of these other criteria related to transitional housing are worked out. But this whole assessment is sensitive to the fact that we need to kind of bridge that gap.
And is there a limit to the transitional housing, a time, sort of the, limit 3 months, 4 months, or no, that's still to be determined? So
There is no.
transition, there is no, okay.
But we've been talking about it in terms of the type of
Right,
structure, services and supports for the
Yes.
company.
yeah,
And that aligns with, say, the boarding house definition or the bed and breakfast definition. So in the sense that when you look at, say, the definition of a bed and breakfast, by definition, it's a place where people stay there in a transient fashion and receive one meal. Yep. Right, and so there's already the concept of certain lengths of occupancy along with certain services provided. And so through, planning board discussions and, whatever housing working group comes together to also work on these things, then we will further flesh out some of those criteria.
So this may be backing up to a more basic part of this discussion. Seems like it started before some of us took office. The goal is to separate out those kinds of more permanent living facilities than from a tourist like bed and breakfast and hotel, because they are different and serve different purposes.
I think the answer is yes, but let me back up. The purpose of this is to make sure that we're doing that sort of code harmonization work
Okay.
and accounting for the on-the-ground experience that is a bit more nuanced than our current code provisions might suggest.
Okay.
But at the same time, there are already existing categories for things like hotels and bed and breakfasts. And so we want to make sure that we're also treating them in a way that, furthers our compliance and transparency goals. Anything else on the 277?
I have a question. So this will then, all these licenses people will go to Lisa, the clerk's office.
Yes, so we've also, and Elisa is here and can chime in. I don't know how many copies of this are generally available, but she worked on a couple of things. The first is kind of simple application checklist to show that, anyone applying for this license has gotten they have a valid permit from the buildings department, or they have a special use permit that was, granted and is still active. It's just a quick checklist. There's also information to make sure that we have the accurate contact info, an email address, a website, if we are talking about a hotel or some sort of, advertising structure like that. Again, central will be in the clerk's office, and then for the license, which will have, look like this, have a nice grease seal. And it has to be displayed somewhere. Well, so there is a requirement that it be posted. Everyone who has stayed in a hotel anywhere knows that there's in some office, there's a document like this, and there's also, even though it wasn't the impetus for this effort, there's some sort of security that comes with knowing you are at a place that's, gone through the proper channels. So Lisa will, after being satisfied that all the documents have been submitted, provide a license like this. And all licenses according to 277 expire on December 31st. So that has always been in the law. That is not an addition.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I could apply and get that permit, I'm sorry.
This is the
The
license.
license in November, and it expires in,
6 weeks.
is that because of the work involved?
That's because our 277 has always set a uniform end time.
Because it's easier to track.
In the beginning of the year. And now, we've had a few conversations about how the underlying inspections sort of align with that. And the way that this lands is that you come and have a snapshot of compliance. So as of, your renewal date, let's say you come in just before the end of the year, or you come in on January 1st, we're probably not gonna go, shut people down between the 31st and New Year's Day. If you come on New Year's Day with all of your documents, let's say you have an underlying permit from the buildings department, it is due to be renewed in June, right? It doesn't mean that you have to go and re-renew everything before you apply, it's the snapshot. As of the date that you come to the clerk's office, you line up all of your documents, everything is still active. and, you know, you can get your license. You may then have an obligation to go back and, you know, get your renewal. You will have that obligation, but it doesn't mean that you can't get this license, which is good for a year.
Challenge.
But why is it not a calendar year?
Why is it not? It's just much easier, but it is a calendar year in terms of.
Well, why is it a
Separate
calendar
numbers, why
year
does it
from-
rotate?
From November 25th when it first got.
So the lawyerly answer is that that is what 277 has always said. And the
And we're not changing that.
administrative, that's not one of our recommendations. It's a much easier system to track. If everybody comes in.
Administratively, having a single date for expiration, it makes it easier to manage. And, you know, I think that, you know, as we said, I think the first year might be the only awkward type year for businesses, but once you get into the cycle of things, it really is not gonna be any impact for them at the end of the calendar year, because if they did get renewed, say, in a June timeframe, then they would have that documentation when they go for renewal, and that would be acceptable. They would get their new license, and then the next calendar year, they do the same thing. It'll fall into place. It's just, the first year for any operation might be just that awkward timing.
The alternative would be to have to require the clerk to note every distinct date of renewal for every separate property, and then track and contact that individual to figure out whether or not on their renewal date,
There's software that does that though.
we don't have that. So we might want to, if what you decide is that you don't want to do this and have, you know, some separate date, then allocate funds for software and training for our clerk. And then have our clerk spend her time doing that, and then increase the fee to cover the cost of the software and training. But to continue with the law as it is, which has a uniform point in time, that is a much simpler system, and it allows us to keep the fee relatively modest.
Right, that's what I'm saying, it's a modest fee. So to me, yeah, it might be unfortunate if you go in November, but we're not, you know,
This is not hundreds of dollars.
This is
Yeah.
also not 1860. This is the 21st century.
right, but if we want to get it, then we would have to up the price for all to make up for that.
I mean, you
So-
go to get your driver's license on your birthday.
I'm gonna
It's
call
not
on
December
myself
31st.
here. So I think like I would be comfortable, you know, like going, if we could initiate this and then at a future time, right? Say when the budget is being done for next year, then move
Yeah.
into that a situation,
It's a
so,
conversation with the clerk.
Yeah. yeah.
Yeah, I don't think
And see
it's,
how it
I don't think
goes.
it's a bad idea, I just don't know if it's really that workable right now, and
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's,
I'm not saying
it's
this needs to happen
150
now,
bucks,
but
it's, you know.
Eventually.
And the documents that you would be required to submit, they could not be taken online?
Well, they would be submitting, here's the application, they would be submitting the operating permit that they get from the building department, copy of the special permit, if they get that from the planning board, or site plan approval, if they get that, and proof of Ulster County tax payment, if that's applicable as well. So those documents would need to be accompanying this simple application, and they should have those in hand. They get those when they receive them.
But again, is the process something that can be done online, or do you physically have to come and present those documents?
So, I mean, this could easily be made a fillable form, absolutely, and I'm sure that, I mean, our documents go out as electronic approvals, they go out electronically, so the owner should have that electronically. I'm assuming the building department does the same thing with the operating permit, they can send it electronically. So I don't see any reason why it couldn't be remitted. The fee, I don't know the city clerk's capability of accepting fees online, credit card payments, that would be Lisa.
Yeah, we're just the history of how the city operates, not every department has access to, the same type of software to accept
Right.
credit cards, like we've been slowly getting there and slowly introducing us to the 21st century, but those things take time. And we're not there with every department. So I mean, and even the fillable forms, I mean, I think that would be something that we would want to check in with the clerk's office to make sure they have the capability of that.
Right now, the clerk's office uses a printable form, I believe, for oil requests. I don't know if they've updated even for that, for fully fillable, but I could be wrong. I do know that what is required is not simply filling out the form, though, you have to also be able to upload documents. So we're talking about, in addition to paying online. So that's a pretty substantial IT lift for our website. So again, we're trying to keep this in the kind of lowest administrative burden, low cost approach. If at some other time it makes sense to have a more streamlined approach, that would be great.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think obviously our goal is really to get this actually in place and at least functioning at a certain level right now. We've talked, and Bartek couldn't be here tonight, but he does have a certain software that he uses for the short-term rentals, and that may be something that could be used in this case, but that hasn't been really refined yet and determined if that's possible. So we might have some software that we might be able to borrow from, but we don't know. Municity might be able to pull this together. Again, those are things that we don't have the final answers to yet, but we just kind of want to get this functioning and this licensing going. I mean, it's been in the code, it has not been applied, and I think it's really needed to have a good picture.
It has been applied, but we haven't had this kind of central repository
Right.
and kind of clean register of everything, that this would help us to achieve.
Michael, then Andrea.
And so when their license expires, how long do they have to renew it before we either begin that process of notifying them or shutting them down, or what is the enforcement of the expiry after it expires or after they continue to operate without this?
So some of this is, I mean, your question is really asking me to imagine how it will play out, because we haven't had that kind of comprehensive enforcement heretofore. It also requires me to imagine how the buildings department will be able to incorporate this aspect of enforcement into its existing work. And I don't know that I'm fully capable to do that, but I can give you a lawyerly answer. So the way that we've talked about so far is to send a kind of reminder, ideally, at the beginning of the fourth quarter of the year. As you know, it's not a long list. How many people are, like a dozen-ish, dozen and a half?
Yeah, a little
18-ish?
over a dozen.
So you send out a letter saying you are, under 277, you have a license, all of them expire at the end of the year. Please make every effort to renew before the deadline. If you have a question, call the clerk's office. And the goal was also, and this responds to some of the feedback we got from Steve Knox, we don't want everybody to wait until the 28th to start calling the building department.
Well, and operating on a license is $1,000 a day fine. And that's,
So what we have in here is up to,
okay.
obviously, so it's up to.
Okay.
Andrea.
So I think this is important to do, and I appreciate that this is a multi-department effort bringing this forward, and I agree with Michael that it would be really nice to enter the 21st century. I just practically don't see us there yet. So perhaps as an unofficial ask, we could just ask whatever department or all of you just to keep us attuned how this goes forward, so that way in case we're like, okay, this is going well, but we want to really, in the budget season, perhaps allocate money to actually do that. I don't think we need to put anything official in that, but we could just ask whoever wants to just to keep us updated with how this goes. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I would say having, the council having, done work on chapter 277 back in 21, this all looks great, seeing all the work that's come into it and all the collaboration. And I think it's really, really important and line it up with the code. Any further questions?
Well, I have some questions because I read
Yep.
I read through it.
Good.
Actually. And, I found like, there's like a little typo.
Okay.
At the end of the paragraph A, it just says opera. I mean, there's like an extra word that's, I think it's because of the tracking, it just sort of ended up, at least in this, right here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay.
And also in paragraph C1, it sort of seemed like there were two sentences. It seemed like there was something missing that may again have gotten deleted or something, because it looks like presentation of proof of occupancy, et cetera, is evidence that a facility has been in existence prior to the effective date of the subsection. But then it goes into upon payment of the applicable fee, and I didn't know what was, it seemed like there was something missing in there.
Yeah, I think this is a,
So all it needs is that sentence. We can cross out the last two.
yeah, I think that is, one of the track changes.
See, that's what I figured. Yeah. Because it's not perfect. These track changes, and no, it's not perfect. What else? Let's see. Where the definitions of bed and breakfast are. In one of the track changes version, there was more of a definition. There was just a one sentence definition in this version. And then there was the 405 definition that had been suggested maybe to put in, but I didn't see it here, and I just wondered whether it had been decided not to put that in, or.
Correct. To explain, there is bed and breakfasts traditionally had an owner occupancy requirement.
Right, I see.
And they have evolved somewhat and can have an owner or occupancy requirement or an on-site presence 24 hours a day of an owner or occupier.
I see.
And that's kind of how we have defined it.
I see. So right, so this is really, yeah. That's moving this way. We don't need it.
If you think about the traditional concept of a bed and breakfast,
Okay.
it was somebody opening up their house, they're making a frittata in the morning and they're staying. You're eating with them, which was the original concept of Airbnb that sort of evolved in another direction, right? And so these are evolving concepts and we just try to bring it up to date.
Okay.
There's a typo, there's some extra space here too.
Let's see. Oh, this is just a question. It's not anything in here, but it says further enforcement procedure. It talks, this is 277.9. It talks about you can proceed against all violators by, means provided by law, not referred to in here. Are some of those means would be like closure of the property? I'm just wondering what some of those other further enforcement procedures might be, even though they don't need to be listed here, but I'm just curious.
This is long-standing legalese and I tend to try to not use that language. This was existing
Right.
text.
Yeah.
I mean, really, these are city court procedures by and large.
I see.
If there were a nuisance, then we would proceed differently, and so
I
there
see.
are some provisions for problematic properties of a different kind.
That was it. Okay, yeah, that was pretty much a few. And it looks good.
Yeah, I like it too because it, like where it says here about revocation of license, it's by resolution, we can by resolution of the city of Kingston, and that brings control back to the council if there's issues. I think that's important as well. Okay, so if any other questions, I'm gonna read the resolution.
Should be with the typographical corrections in there.
Oh, okay.
But it just, the community purpose is the attached. so
See
we'll just
attached,
attach
can I?
That's fine.
Okay, all right, so it's a resolution, a resolution to adopt amendments to chapter 277 of the City of Kingston Administrative Code, see attached, which outlines all of the changes. So if I can get a motion. Scott Childress, and second by Bob Dennison. All right, if I can call for a vote, all in favor? Anyone opposed? I'm sorry, did you?
No, I honestly did not read it through. I saw the version that had the track changes to it, and I've been unable to get into my laptop.
Okay, so you're a no for tonight, or?
I just.
Well, you could vote yes or no, you can't not vote,
Oh,
but you could, yeah, you can't.
Okay, then I vote.
However, you're not beholden to your vote when it comes to the common council.
Okay.
So what I'd recommend is vote whichever way you want
I
tonight,
will vote yes.
and then you are more than welcome to change your vote at council after you have the chance to read it.
All right, so if everyone was in favor? No,
Yes.
no,
No, no.
no no's? Okay, so it passes unanimously 5-0.
Yeah, you don't pass it, or because you see your computers.
I don't know.
If I
was able to
can,
say yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you.
So there was a conversation before about bringing back the business of chapters 178 and 179. And I didn't see that listed on the agenda, so I'm not sure.
I didn't receive, I brought that up, that was about the properties, right? Yeah, and I brought that up and I didn't receive any response, so it did not come back on
I mean, it would be old business.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you want to see.
We could talk about it. It's his old business.
Yeah.
Sorry if that was, I'm not used to being this organized, so I apologize if that was me and not really happening.
Could be a faulty system failure.
the.
We've been working on 277 a lot, so.
Did that get sent out? I don't remember.
So it did, so way back in August, I think the date was August 15th.
But not like in the last week.
Not in the
Okay,
last
okay.
week. I think it circulated again in December and then again maybe in the beginning of January.
Okay,
So there's been
okay,
kind of a couple of agenda discussions about it, but the actual substantive presentation happened in August.
right. I remember that, but I don't recall receiving anything, which also might be just system error changing. Yeah, so if we can, if we're good with putting that on first under old business and then getting to the easements, or?
Yeah, no,
Well,
I
we're
was
discussed.
just, 277, I don't know if you need me anymore.
Okay.
So,
Do we want to talk about the
You
easement?
do,
we can talk about-
because
yeah,
your, that came, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So next on the agenda is under old business, T Kellogg Esquire easement requests. These are easements down on Delaware Avenue. So,
Do you want to start?
Yeah, and I think you got a couple people on the call.
oh, that's
as
who those
well.
are. Okay. Oh, great. Okay. Okay.
But this all really came about, there was an application before the planning board for some lot line revisions down at the corner of Delaware and Courts, to private properties that wanted to revise some abutting property lines between them for private reasons of encroachments and just providing more land area to the other. So in the process of doing that, the survey identified some encroachments into the public right of way. And so we, at that time, although we approved the lot line revision for the private lands, we obviously didn't have any authority to give permissions for any of the other encroachments into the public right of way. We noted that, come a sale someday, it could be an issue with title, and that's kind of where we're at right now. There are encroachments, which need to be addressed, and whether they're granted an easement, they are pretty significant on the Delaware Avenue piece. It's a pretty substantial portion of the building, the front of the building is in the public right of way and has been. We did confirm though through the assessor's office that, they have been paying, basically, it's that has been on the assessed value of the property. So even though it's on city property, the assessed value reflects the improvement, yeah, so.
So they've been paying taxes and they've been maintaining that property as if it was theirs.
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone on Zoom want to speak to this? I see that we have a couple of people, I believe that you are here for this agenda item.
Are they for the?
Yes, hi, good evening. Yes, we are here and we are waiting for this to be cleared in order to close on the property. And that is stated true that the owners have been maintaining the property for, I believe, 4 generations, paying taxes, maintaining, and they are now ready to sell, and this is holding us up.
Okay, does anyone have questions?
Yes, I don't have a question, Leo. I know I was the one that brought up the $10 and if it's appropriate. And you responded to that, and I'm satisfied with the city attorney's response, so I don't have any concern about the $10 value for transfer.
And I would agree with that.
And what was that answer?
The answer was,
Well,
I mean, it's,
if you want, we can
it's
go
long.
into attorney-client session. Is
okay.
that what that
It
looks
was
for?
sent, it was sent to us.
Yeah, it
No,
would
I
have
brought
been
it up
lots
also.
of rules.
The last ones.
Huh?
Are you?
I read it. No, it's on my phone, I can read it.
I'm a council member. Sorry, Bob.
No problem. Explain it, but it's long.
We really can't stop.
If there are questions, should be an attorney-client session.
Okay.
Yeah.
$10.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I'm just writing up this. No further questions? Okay, so just tell me if this is right. I'm sorry that I'm new, so to this, so I want to make sure it's correct. A resolution to adopt 2 easement agreements for 166 Delaware Avenue. Because there's 2 agreements, like Yanta and Sasso, and then John's.
So isn't it authorizing the mayor to?
Okay.
enter into those agreements?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, thank you. So should I say the 2?
It's two.
Yeah.
I was confused at one point, because Matt started off in the city, there was more of a discussion of hand easement.
Two. The one address and one. Anyway,
Well, one in court, one adult
On property.
each.
no, but it came in.
We're gonna get into an argument about the transient.
Don't you can explain that to me?
That issue's on its way to not.
Really?
The
The Trinity?
Easements?
We lived in Kingston, Maryland. My job, we had these 2 neighbors who, instead of having marital spat about whatever they're actually involved in, took the form of an argument over the nature of the Trinity. Whether it was one thing, with food, you kind of figure it out. And they would get into these knockdown, drag-out fights. And it was like, they were really arguing about who didn't take out the garbage, who didn't change the daughter's diapers, but it was always just this form of Trinity. And I discovered in the job process, I just been offered the job at New Falls, I discovered that one of them was actually a graduate of SUNY New Falls. And I was thinking, if that's what goes on at SUNY New Falls, I'm gonna have to rethink this whole thing.
And you took the job anyway.
Well, I came up and visited. and I realized-
What's sitting for the Trinity?
Almost.
In a
Okay.
sense, it was the right of way,
Yeah,
the right of Yahweh.
Oh.
All right.
but, okay.
Stop having
All
fun.
right.
Okay.
How many left there? So I'm gonna read this out loud. A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into 2 easement agreements for 166 Delaware Avenue, SBL 56.28-1-13.100 for $10 each. Can I call for a vote? All in favor?
And, you know,
Aye. Oh, motion, sorry, motion.
I'll move it.
Okay, second, Randy.
Discussion.
Any discussion? Call for a vote. All in favor? Anyone against? Passes unanimously 5-0. So
Okay. you're
this
good
just
to go.
needs to go to the full council for a final vote on February 6th, I believe, and then we are done here.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you for your patience.
There, yeah.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Okay, appreciate it.
Have a good night.
You too. Okay, so then we'll move on to old business to discuss 178, chapter 178 and 179 in our
So I still don't have enough copies, but now we know that we have a copier, so here are some extras, and then I can just sort of do, who is the 178? 178, oh wait, is that 178? These are three.
Was 178.
These are three, is that what we're looking at, 178? Well, we are looking at both, so maybe I do have copies, so 178, 178. 178. There's two. And this is 179. There's 179 is for, there are a couple of things around the other way, so there's another 178. Case of 179. Okay, so. And I guess the composition of the body has changed quite a bit since the
Yeah.
first presentation, so I guess this is, it's all working out. So one of the things that, or when we first presented these proposed changes to the unsafe buildings and the vacant buildings portions of the code, we were looking at addressing the problems in the city of abandoned properties and making sure that we were using all of the tools in our arsenal at the most efficient way and with the least amount of risk, given a variety of legal changes that we discussed at that time. And so the changes to 170, so what you have in front of you are markups that we did back in over the summer, and then the purple text are a few comments that we got back from the building department a couple of hours ago. And so I can sort of walk through those, even though, you know, it seems like everyone might need a little bit more time with the text before a vote. So unsafe buildings, there's a clarification here, you know, not just the building safety officer, but also code enforcement officer, sort of a broader definition, to be clear about who
Safe.
is able to perform sort of inspection work. And then maybe it makes more sense for me to just sort of give the broad overview and then dive a little bit more into the purple points. Some of these were discussed, I think, at the building safety meeting in December. So the goal is to make sure that our unsafe buildings are addressed. And also part of addressing them is not only dealing with the public safety hazard, but also unfortunately, some of the fines and fees associated with the city's work in connection with those properties. That's 178 in broad strokes before we delve into some of the finer points. 179, it's a little trickier, but also interesting. From the perspective of figuring out what our available tools are for dealing with these without increasing risk to the city, risks of various kinds. And so one of the issues that's come up is that there are properties throughout the city that we know are not, say somebody passed away, their family's not here, they're just sort of sitting and are problematic. Heretofore, our primary approach to dealing with them has been to wait until they're back to taxes owed, and then go through in rem proceedings, which take a significant amount of time and, you know, due to some legal changes, also have increased risk for us, at least at the moment. And so thinking about the zombie properties and some other approaches for abandoned properties that other municipalities are taking, that's where these changes really come into play to clarify the criteria for that our buildings department can apply when certifying, making initial certifications of abandonment. And that's, you know, for those of you who looked at it or have it in front of you here, you know, when the property is not properly secured, if there is sort of dangerous squatting activity, if there are, you know, there's a pipe that's burst and sort of, all sorts of things can happen. Failure maintained during snowstorms, all of that. If we document, fine, and we're not fining for the sole purpose of, you know, bleeding our residents dry, but there are consequences to documenting or failing to document the city's work on these properties and quantifying the cost of that. If we do it properly and then put those fines and fees and get an abandonment certification, that abandonment certification can then be sort of the predicate action for going into court and getting a court order certifying that that property has been abandoned and allowing us to have some more options for dealing with that property. So sort of the purpose of all this.
Are those violations public knowledge? Like public information, or do they have to be FOIL?
When you're saying those violations,
So say, well, like, say I live next to a property that's not well maintained or believed to be abandoned. And can I look, and nothing's happened to it, can I look up all the violations that have accrued on that property in a certain time frame?
so that's hard for me to answer because I'm not fully familiar with all of the municity functions that are available on the buildings department kind of portal. There's a portal into municity. That may be, I'm just not sure.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, just from an experience perspective, I've been able to call the building department, and they've been very responsive on those issues.
The member of the public or citizen?
Well, I wouldn't even say that. I don't know if they respond to the public as well.
Well, there are different standards, information sharing.
Yeah, I'm
standards.
asking out of ignorance, not too.
And yeah, I think that's enough. There are different
Yeah,
standards.
I would reach out to building and safety and, you know, speak to them about it.
And does this also address a situation, say, I'm thinking of a couple of properties in Ward 1 that have been abandoned for decades. Now, those have just been sitting there continuing to deteriorate, but apparently if the fines are paid, is there any remedy when it comes to a building that's been abandoned where, you know, maybe it's on a bank, you know, it's gone into foreclosure, it's on a bank's, you know, asset list, they're paying the fines, but meanwhile, the building continues to be there.
So it's not just about fines. The fines have multiple purposes. But getting the initial certification of abandonment has to do with the readily observable conditions of the property. Not simply the payment.
Okay. And how does one get a certificate of abandonment? Is that the process that is detailed here that one must go through?
Correct.
Okay, so I guess I should read this.
I really hope you do because you're gonna think of one thing.
Do you have emailed the whole committee or?
I don't know if I've seen this.
I did email back in, at some point when we were talking about bringing it back as old business.
Oh.
I emailed, but that might have been before a couple of the new
Before
members were sworn in.
Okay.
Can you resend it with the full council instead of just the laws and rules committee?
Thank you.
That would be great.
And then, maybe I answered it, maybe there is no, and then, the criteria are.
The criteria here, so I'll read this, yes. And if there are further questions that I have, can I just reach out to you or do I read, what's the next process? Will we discuss this again?
I I would agree if any questions that go to corporation council could include all of this as well, because we may all have the same
Okay,
questions,
just
so,
remember, we can't
yeah.
debate or discuss, it's email is only for questions.
For questions, okay.
All right,
But
but
we're bringing the entire council or just laws and rules?
no, I would include the full council.
Okay.
I always like to have the full council because,
I'll do that then if I see it.
you know,
Okay.
But to be clear, in a non-open meetings law fashion, there are some litigation-related concerns about how we may be dealing with particular properties. And so that's a totally fine question. If you have a that's a totally fine thing to email about or to come.
If it's a specific rather than a general.
If you're asking a legal question
Okay.
about, advice that you need as an older person, I'm happy to provide it and
Okay.
share it. And I think I try to copy lots of people on their emails, so information gets shared.
So the fees that are associated with an abandoned building property, $1 per square foot. And then it accelerates only in year 5 to $3 per square foot. Is that usual, $1 per square foot? It doesn't seem like that much of a deterrent.
So I do have to go back to some of the research that I believe it was Jonathan and Bartek were doing on what different, a kind of comparative look at other municipalities. But remember, what we're talking about here is not just, or what you just highlighted is one aspect of the kind of fee and fine structure. So for example, if you didn't, and I think Bernie, you raised this issue maybe now 2+ years ago, about whether or not, places that don't maintain their sidewalks in the snow. Whether or not we had ever, or how we were dealing with fees and fines around that. So that example, say, if you have some problem at the abandoned property that is separately a violation, there would be a separate violation for that thing, and then you're talking about this other kind of abandonment.
so it could be significantly higher, because if they're not maintaining their sidewalks, if they're not, I can't think of any other violations.
But or if they have to mow their lawn, right, we
Yeah.
even charge for that.
So there's an
multiple-
abandonment fine.
No,
and then it could
I
be-
understand
yeah.
that, yes, and it's
Right.
exacerbated by the other aspects of,
Of maintenance.
It's a layering
to it, yeah.
approach.
just doesn't seem like that much.
Well, don't by year 3, wouldn't they be delinquent on taxes and eligible for foreclosure?
But in a lot of cases.
Not every-
Taxes, but are not going around.
Yeah,
Banks.
Sometimes the,
So sometimes the estate.
When there's a house in Ward 3 where the person who, they never quite finished it. But it's a dream that they had, so they're not getting that. But they're all beautiful.
They're poetic.
Yeah, I'm just saying, there's different.
there are situations, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
And
just wondering why it doesn't accelerate before year 5.
I can, whenever we come back, I can give some comparators. But also our goal as a city has never been to take the approach of, I would say, being fine forward. Like some municipalities where, the use of civil fines really has been, bludgeoned to bleed communities dry. That hasn't been our approach. And so even when thinking about how to deal with something like this, that wasn't our approach either. Michael?
so these are just 2 quick questions. All buildings or structures, this applies to both commercial and residential equally.
Yes, though the reason we brought it forward was to focus on the residential issues.
And then, so all buildings or structures, so if somebody has like a old dilapidated detached garage, they could be cited for that as well. Because there's a lot of those.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Old state R&D, like.
Let me,
I don't think that counts as a structure.
let me think about the response to that. I'm not ready to give the response yet because structure is defined in a couple of different ways in a couple of different chapters of our code. But in a non-lawyerly answer, practically speaking, the goal is to really address as a primary step, abandoned property, fully abandoned properties, not necessarily
unsafe
kind of
conditions.
wonky
Well,
garage.
to get into
So basically, sort of,
neighbors.
as
If we would have
So
building
commercial-
safety, they'd
Yeah,
still
I
be
mean,
fine
there's
with
still-
building safety.
Okay.
There's other channels that would allow for.
So example, there was a property in Ward 3 where the garage was a standalone garage, it had a fire. And the owner never repaired it, we call building safety, and there were adequate regulations that allow building safety to force them to repair the structure. If I'm hearing it correctly.
But it's hard for me sitting here right now to imagine the certification of abandonment criteria applying in a situation like that.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess we'll get this out to everyone
Mhm.
and then, bring it back next month, or, yeah. It's only a couple weeks now, but.
Yeah.
Um, And we should be ready to vote.
Well, yeah,
The day that it will be
guess-
done at that point, or
well, I mean,
is there any more work
Like-
that you feel like your office needs to do?
that my office needs to do. No.
Okay.
Just wanted, yeah.
So that you're-
Yeah,
but that
so,
doesn't-
but that doesn't mean that there isn't more work to be done.
Right,
And I
right,
sort
right.
of-
Yeah, I just wanted to delineate like what.
I think if we all read through it,
Yeah.
make sure we come back, and we may all say,
Wonderful.
wonderful,
or
or
no.
we may all have feedback, tweaks, and then decide, the committee can decide those, so. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, it's good to see this. Thank you for working on this. I know it's a lot of work.
One more.
It's, my job, but it's important. Yeah.
People need to be here. That's it. Yeah, so if, anyone else have anything, they, call for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, Sarah. Second?
I'll say.
Okay, Sarah. All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Okay. We are adjourned.
Thanks,
at
Elisa.
8:03. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elisa.
Good night.